How did a small group of nomadic tribes from the freezing steppes of Central Asia conquer more land in 25 years than the Romans did in 400? This video uncovers the hidden formula behind the Mongols' lightning-fast rise, a mix of genius strategy, brutal discipline, and psychological warfare, and reveals what made them unstoppable until the world finally learned how to fight back. Before the rise of the Mongols, the world was divided, fractured into kingdoms and empires that had grown powerful but complacent. The great civilizations of Asia, the Middle East, and Europe were all caught in their own struggles for survival and dominance, unaware that a storm was gathering on the far side of the steppes, a storm that would soon rewrite the map of the world forever. In the early 12th century, the heart of Eurasia was a patchwork of tribes and kingdoms, each fighting for resources, honor, and power. China was split between dynasties, the Jin in the north, ruling with wealth and arrogance, and the Song in the south, known for their art, trade, and intellect. But both were vulnerable. They had walls, bureaucracy, and luxury, yet little unity. Their emperors were surrounded by courtiers who valued politics over war, while beyond their northern borders, nomadic tribes watched and waited. To the west, the Islamic world was a mix of brilliant culture and bitter rivalries. The once mighty Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad had lost much of its power. Local rulers and warlords now competed under its shadow. Persia and Central Asia were fragmented among small khanates and kingdoms, powerful but disunited. The Khwarezm Empire, proud and newly rich from Silk Road trade, saw itself as the rising star of the region. Its ruler, Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, believed his power untouchable. In Europe, the Crusades were reshaping politics and religion. Christian knights marched eastward, clashing with Muslim armies for control of the Holy Land. Kings and popes fought over influence, while feudal lords warred for territory. There was chaos, ambition, and greed, but all of it confined within known borders. The world believed its powers were stable, its empires eternal. No one imagined that a people from the wild heart of Asia could challenge them all. And in the center of this vast continent lay the Mongolian steppe, an endless ocean of grass stretching from Siberia to northern China. It was a land of extremes, blistering summers, freezing winters, and winds that never stopped. Life here was not built on stone, but on movement. Tribes followed their herds across the land, living in tents called gairs, surviving by their skill with horses and bows. There were no cities, no walls, no written records, only oral traditions, alliances, and blood feuds that could last generations. The Mongols were one of many such tribes, fierce, proud, and constantly at war with their neighbors. They fought the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, and each other. Every tribe had its own Khan, its own ambitions. Unity was a dream, one that always seemed impossible. The steppe was a place where power shifted with the seasons. One victory could bring glory, one defeat could bring extinction. Yet from this harsh, unforgiving land would soon emerge something the world had never seen, a force that could move faster than any army, strike harder than any empire, and control more land than anyone thought possible. At this point in history, no one was watching the Mongols. The great civilizations dismissed them as savages, horsemen with no culture, no strategy, no future. The Chinese called them barbarians beyond the wall. The Persians considered them too primitive to threaten a true empire. The Europeans didn't even know they existed, but the truth was different. The steppe had forged its people through centuries of struggle. Survival in this brutal environment demanded unity, strength, and adaptability. The Mongols had mastered the art of endurance. Their lives depended on speed, precision, and loyalty. A Mongol warrior could ride for days without stopping, living on dried meat and fermented milk, sleeping in the saddle if needed. Their horses were small but tireless. They could cross entire continents while others were still marching through deserts. This lifestyle, built for survival, unknowingly became the perfect foundation for conquest. While the empires of the world built cities and walls, the Mongols built movement. While others relied on bureaucracy, the Mongols relied on instinct and discipline. They did not need supply lines. The steppe was their supply line. They did not need fortresses. The earth itself was their home. And because the world underestimated them, no one prepared for what was coming. No alliance, no army, no fortress had ever faced a force that could vanish like wind and return like thunder. The political world was blind to the coming change. The Jin dynasty thought its great wall could keep them safe. The Khwarezm Empire believed its wealth and soldiers were enough to hold back any threat. In Europe, kings and knights looked east only to dream of trade, not terror. But destiny was shifting quietly far away where a young boy named Temujin was growing up among the wolves and winds of the Mongolian steppe, learning the hard lessons that would turn him into the man the world would call Genghis Khan. Before he became the most feared conqueror in history, Genghis Khan was just a boy named Temujin, born into a world where life was as fragile as the grass beneath a horse's hooves. Around the year 1162, somewhere in the cold heart of the Mongolian steppe, Temujin opened his eyes to a world ruled by tribes, blood, and survival. His father, Yasuge, was a respected chieftain of the Borjigin clan, and for a brief moment it seemed Temujin's life would be one of promise and leadership, but fate had other plans. When Temujin was still a child, his father was poisoned by enemies from a rival tribe, the Tatars. With Yasuge's death, everything collapsed. His family, his mother Holon and her children, were abandoned by their own people. Tribal law dictated that without a strong male leader, a family had no place among the clan. They were cast out, left to die in the wilderness. For years, they wandered the steppe, hungry and cold, living off roots, berries, and small animals. Helen taught her children to survive through sheer willpower. She told Temujin that no one would come to save them, that strength must come from within. It was here, in isolation and hunger, that Temujin learned his first lesson of leadership. That power meant loyalty, and loyalty could not be inherited, it had to be earned. As he grew older, Temujin began to understand the cruel order of the steppe. Tribes lived by alliances and betrayals. Strength was respected, weakness was destroyed. At just 9 years old, his mother arranged a marriage alliance with another tribe, a girl named Bert. Temujin was sent to live with her family until he came of age, a common practice meant to secure political bonds. But even before he could grow into manhood, the storms of fate returned. One night, as Temujin traveled back to his family, he was captured by the Taishid, an enemy tribe that saw him as a potential threat. They enslaved him, shackled him with a wooden collar, and made him a servant. Most boys would have broken under the humiliation, but Temujin endured. He watched, listened, and waited. Every moment of pain was fuel for something greater, a vision that was beginning to form deep within him. Eventually, with the help of a sympathetic guard, he escaped. The experience burned a single truth into his mind. The world respected only those who could seize power with their own hands. From that moment on, Temujin vowed that he would never again be powerless, never again be ruled by another's will. As he reunited with his family and began to rebuild his life, Temujin started forming bonds that went beyond blood. He sought out men who were loyal not because of clan or tribe, but because of respect and shared purpose. He found brothers in arms, men like Jamukha, who would one day become both his greatest friend and fiercest rival. Together, they dreamed of uniting the steppe under one banner, ending the endless cycle of tribal wars. But ambition on the steppe always came with a price. As Temujin's following grew, jealousy followed. Tribal leaders began to see him as a threat, a young man with dangerous ideas about unity and equality. He wasn't born into absolute power. He was creating it. He promised his followers a new world, one where merit mattered more than birth. To the old leaders, that was blasphemy. When his wife, Bert, was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe, Temujin's life changed again. This was not just a personal tragedy, it was a challenge. Most men would have accepted the loss as fate, but Temujin refused. He gathered his allies, including his former blood brother Jamukha and powerful clan leaders, and launched a daring rescue mission. Against all odds, he succeeded. Bert was saved, and Temujin's reputation as a leader who could defy destiny began to spread across the steppe. Yet success also brought division. Jamukha, once his brother in arms, could not accept Temujin's growing influence. Their alliance shattered, turning into one of the most brutal rivalries in steppe history. Jamukha believed in ruling through fear and lineage, the old way. Temujin believed in loyalty, discipline, and justice, the new way. When their armies clashed, Temujin's strategies, speed, and unity crushed Timuca's larger but divided forces. Each victory taught him more about leadership, warfare, and human nature. He learned to reward the loyal and punish betrayal swiftly. He abolished old tribal hierarchies, elevating even slaves and commoners to positions of power if they proved their worth. The Mongols, for the first time, began to see themselves not as scattered tribes, but as one people. Every hardship, the hunger, the exile, the betrayal, had forged Temujin into something more than a survivor. He was becoming a visionary, one who could see beyond the steppe's horizon. The lessons of his youth were carved into his soul. Unity was strength, fear was a weapon, and loyalty was more powerful than blood. The tribes that once looked down on his family were now whispering his name in fear and admiration. Temujin's rise was no longer just a personal journey. It was the spark of a force that would soon shake the foundations of the known world. When people think of the Mongol Empire, they imagine vast armies thundering across open plains, unstoppable and endless. But what truly made them invincible wasn't their numbers or their ferocity, it was their speed. The Mongols moved like no army before them, faster than anyone thought possible. They didn't just fight wars. They rewrote the very concept of how war could be fought. In the early 13th century, the Mongols began to build something entirely new, a war machine designed for mobility, precision, and adaptability. Genghis Khan understood that in the open steppes, survival depended on movement. The moment you stood still, you were dead. So he created an army that could move as freely as the wind. Every man, every horse, every order was part of a system built for speed. The foundation of this speed lay in the Mongol horse. Small, stocky, and incredibly tough, these horses could travel long distances without rest, feed, or water. A single Mongol warrior often had 3 to 5 horses, switching between them during battle or travel. While most medieval armies trudged forward on foot or relied on cumbersome wagons, the Mongols could cover up to 100 miles in a single day. Their horses grazed wherever they stopped, meaning the army carried no need for supply chains or forage wagons. In an age where logistics often decided wars, the Mongols had already solved the problem. Every Mongol warrior was both cavalry and archer, trained from childhood to ride and shoot with perfect accuracy. They could fire arrows backward while galloping full speed, their bodies balanced with the grace of instinct. A storm of arrows from a Mongol army could rain down before the enemy even saw their faces. But this wasn't random chaos, it was carefully orchestrated precision. Genghis Khan organized his armies into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, a decimal system that allowed instant command and control. Each unit could operate independently or combine to form massive forces within hours. Communication was the invisible power that made their speed possible. Across thousands of miles, Genghis Khan built an extraordinary relay system known as the Yam. This was a network of relay stations spread across the empire, each stocked with fresh horses and supplies. Couriers could ride from Mongolia to Eastern Europe, changing horses every few miles, delivering messages at lightning speed. Information that would take months to travel in other empires could reach its destination in days. This communication web became the arteries of the empire, keeping every commander connected, every order swift, every enemy unprepared. But their true genius was not just in physical speed, it was in psychological speed. The Mongols never let their enemies rest. They struck before word could spread, they vanished before armies could gather, and they returned when least expected. They could surround an enemy, retreat in apparent panic, then suddenly wheel around and attack from multiple directions. Armies that tried to chase them found themselves lost and isolated, their supply lines destroyed, their morale shattered. Behind this relentless movement was an intricate intelligence network. Genghis Khan valued information as much as weapons. He sent scouts, spies, and merchants ahead to study terrain, weather, defenses, and weaknesses. Before any battle, the Mongols already knew their enemy's size, location, and even the quality of their weapons. Every invasion was planned with terrifying precision. Their speed wasn't blind aggression, it was calculated efficiency. The Mongols also used fear to accelerate their victories. They spread tales of their own invincibility, amplifying panic wherever they went. Villages surrendered without a fight. Cities opened their gates before arrows flew. Every rumor became a weapon. Fear traveled faster than horses, and Genghis Khan used it as his silent ally. The Mongols didn't need to conquer every fortress. Sometimes the mere sound of their approach did the work for them. Their adaptability on the battlefield made them almost supernatural in the eyes of their enemies. When facing heavily armored knights, they didn't meet them head-on, they circled them, exhausted their horses, then cut them down from a distance. In sieges, they captured engineers from conquered lands and learned to use catapults, gunpowder, and siege towers. The Mongols could turn from desert raiders into siege masters overnight. They studied every enemy, absorbed every strength, and turned it into their own. What Genghis Khan built wasn't just an army. It was a moving civilization. Discipline was absolute. No soldier could abandon his post or disobey an order without execution. But loyalty was rewarded with riches and promotion based on merit, not birth. This loyalty made the Mongol war machine unbreakable. When others relied on kings and nobles, Genghis Khan relied on trust and fear woven together into perfect order. While other empires marched in rigid formations, the Mongols flowed like water, changing direction, splitting apart, and coming together again without chaos. They didn't depend on one single strategy. They became strategy itself. Their speed wasn't just movement, it was their identity. It was how they lived, fought, and ruled. The Mongols had turned mobility into a weapon. Their empire began to move across the world faster than any had before, crossing deserts, mountains, and rivers with a precision that seemed impossible. Every nation they faced would soon learn the same terrifying truth. You could see the Mongols coming from miles away, but you could never prepare in time. When the Mongols rode into battle, they didn't just fight with swords and arrows, they fought with fear. Genghis Khan understood something that few leaders before him ever did. The mind was the first battlefield. Before a single arrow was loosed, the enemy's courage had to be broken. And no one mastered this form of warfare like the Mongols. To understand their dominance, you have to understand how deliberately they used terror as a tool. Every action, every rumor, every massacre had a purpose. The Mongols didn't kill for pleasure. They killed to send a message. Their campaigns were designed to crush morale long before armies met face to face. When word spread that the Mongols were approaching, entire cities would surrender before the first rider appeared on the horizon. People had heard the stories of walls that fell without resistance, of rulers who vanished without a trace, of entire populations erased as a warning to others. This wasn't chaos. It was calculated psychological warfare. Genghis Khan would often spare cities that surrendered immediately and destroy those that resisted. This created a chilling pattern. When the next city heard the Mongols were coming, its leaders faced an impossible choice: surrender and live as subjects, or fight and face extinction. The Mongols made sure every story that spread carried fear in its bones. Their tactics on the battlefield were just as psychological. One of their most famous maneuvers was the feigned retreat. The Mongol horsemen would charge with fury, then suddenly turn and flee as if defeated. The enemy, thinking victory was at hand, would chase them across the plains, breaking formation, losing discipline and leaving themselves exposed. Then, at the perfect moment, the Mongols would wheel around, encircle them, and unleash a storm of arrows from every direction. What looked like a retreat was a trap, and entire armies vanished in minutes. This mastery of deception wasn't limited to combat. The Mongols used misinformation to shape entire campaigns. They would spread false intelligence through spies and merchants, convincing enemy rulers that their main army was far away, only for that same army to appear days later at their gates. Sometimes they lit multiple campfires across vast distances at night, making their forces look 10 times larger than they really were. Other times, they used dummies and fake soldiers to intimidate scouts watching from afar. Every rumor they planted, every illusion they created, served a single purpose: to make the enemy believe resistance was hopeless. Their understanding of human fear went beyond tactics. Genghis Khan was a strategist of the mind. He knew that the memory of terror could last longer than the battle itself. When he destroyed a city that resisted him, he often left one or two survivors intentionally to flee and tell the world what they had seen. These survivors became his messengers of fear. No empire before him had used the spread of reputation as a weapon so effectively. Even their diplomacy carried the same calculated coldness. When Genghis Khan sent envoys to demand submission, he offered mercy in exchange for loyalty, but destruction for defiance. When the Khwarezm Empire murdered his envoys, he didn't just retaliate. He obliterated them. He turned their cities into ashes, rivers into blood, and trade routes into deserts of bones. That campaign wasn't just vengeance. It was a warning to every ruler on earth. Insult the Mongols, and your kingdom would vanish from history. Fear also kept his own men disciplined. The punishment for betrayal or cowardice was swift and merciless. Yet within that fear existed loyalty, for every soldier knew that Genghis Khan's justice was absolute. He rewarded bravery, honored loyalty, and protected his followers' families. His warriors were not just fighting for conquest, they were fighting for the promise that under his rule, the chaos of tribal feuds would finally end. What made Mongol warfare terrifying was its efficiency. There was no waste of effort, no unnecessary delay. The moment they entered enemy lands, they collected intelligence from local scouts and spies. They attacked communication lines, destroyed morale, and isolated their targets. When sieges began, they didn't simply wait outside city walls. They adapted, learning from the Chinese and Persians how to use siege engines, catapults, and early forms of gunpowder. But even here, fear was their companion. They would launch the severed heads of enemies over the walls or send captives ahead to spread panic. Every move chipped away at the enemy's will to resist. And the Mongols didn't just win battles, they won without fighting whenever possible. Their reputation became so powerful that some nations offered surrender before even seeing them. Genghis Khan once said that the greatest joy is to conquer one's enemies, but his truest victories came when he conquered without lifting a sword. By weaponizing fear, he made war itself surrender to his name. The brilliance of the Mongols lay not just in their physical dominance, but in their understanding of the human mind. They didn't just destroy armies, they destroyed confidence. They made kings doubt their power, generals mistrust their plans, and soldiers question their courage. No wall was high enough to stop them, because by the time they arrived, the real walls, the walls inside their enemies' minds, had already fallen. Once the tribes of the steppe were united under Genghis Khan's banner, the world changed forever. What began as scattered clans living in isolation transformed into the most efficient and terrifying war machine in history. The Mongol Empire did not grow, it exploded. In just a few decades, it would become the largest contiguous empire the planet had ever seen, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Europe. And the most astonishing part of all, it happened faster than anyone thought possible. After uniting the Mongol tribes, Genghis Khan's first great campaign began with China. To the south lay the Jin dynasty, rich, powerful, and arrogant. They had long considered the nomads of the north to be mere barbarians, unworthy of concern. But that illusion shattered when Genghis Khan's armies descended from the steppes. The Mongols' mobility crushed the slow-moving Jin forces. They surrounded cities before word could even reach the capital. Their archers turned open plains into deadly traps, and their siege engines, borrowed and improved from Chinese engineers, made walls crumble like sand. City after city fell, and the world began to realize that the Mongols were not another raiding tribe. They were a rising storm. Genghis Khan didn't just destroy, he absorbed. With every conquest, he took the knowledge, tools, and talent of the people he conquered. Chinese engineers built his siege machines. Persian scholars helped organize his empire, and Muslim merchants carried information across his growing territories. His genius was not only in battle, but in using the skills of others to strengthen his rule. The Mongol Empire was not an empire of one people, it was an empire of all peoples, bound by discipline, fear, and the promise of order under the Great Khan from the east. Genghis turned westward toward Central Asia. His next target was the Khwarezm Empire, one of the wealthiest and most arrogant kingdoms of its time. It ruled over a vital stretch of the Silk Road, Controlling trade between East and West, Genghis Khan tried diplomacy first, sending envoys with gifts, seeking peaceful trade. But the Shah of Khwarezm, blinded by pride, saw the Mongols as mere nomads pretending to be an empire. He murdered the ambassadors and sent their heads back as an insult. That decision sealed his fate and the fate of his entire empire. What followed was one of the most devastating campaigns in history. The Mongols moved like lightning across Khwarezm's lands. Their strategy was systematic: annihilate resistance, seize control of cities, and burn those who refused to submit. Genghis Khan's armies used the same ruthless efficiency they had perfected in China, destroying cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, leaving only ruins and legends behind. The Shah fled, but there was no place left to hide. The Mongol army pursued him relentlessly until his empire ceased to exist. By the time Genghis Khan turned his gaze westward again, the world was trembling. No empire had ever expanded this quickly, this deliberately, or this intelligently. The Mongols were not mindless conquerors. They built infrastructure as they moved. They established postal relay stations, rest stops, and administrative centers. Trade routes that had once been dangerous became protected highways under Mongol rule. For the first time in centuries, merchants could travel from Europe to China under one empire's protection. The Silk Road flourished again, not because of peace but because of Mongol control. But expansion was never just about conquest, it was about message. Every new victory served as proof of Genghis Khan's divine right to rule. He declared himself the ruler chosen by the eternal blue sky, destined to unite the world. His enemies believed him, not because of faith, but because of fear. Every campaign added new soldiers to his ranks, new nations under his command. When entire regions surrendered, the Mongols didn't destroy them, they absorbed them. Local rulers kept their positions as long as they swore loyalty. Scholars, engineers, and artisans were spared and put to work for the empire. Even religion was tolerated as long as it didn't challenge Mongol authority. The brilliance of Mongol expansion was its balance between brutality and pragmatism. Genghis Khan knew when to destroy and when to build. Cities that resisted were turned to ash, but those that surrendered often prospered under Mongol rule. This duality, terror, and order made the empire not just feared, but respected. The Mongols were both destroyers and protectors, conquerors and lawgivers. And as the years passed, the wave continued. After Genghis Khan's death, his sons and grandsons carried his vision even further. They swept through the Middle East, crushed the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and pushed into Eastern Europe. The Mongol armies reached as far as Hungary and Poland, defeating knights and kings who had never seen anything like them. In the east, Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, conquered the rest of China and founded the Yuan dynasty, ruling from the imperial capital in Beijing. The empire had become a global power, its borders touching almost every major civilization on Earth. The Mongol expansion was not simply military conquest, it was a transformation of the world order. They connected continents that had been separated by distance and fear. They created trade networks, spread technology, and shaped diplomacy on a global scale. The Mongols became the invisible thread weaving East and West together, turning the vast world into one interconnected system under their rule. Through every battle, every march, every act of conquest, the Mongols carried with them the same code: loyalty, discipline, and speed. And as their empire stretched beyond imagination, the world began to understand that this was not just a military campaign, it was the birth of a new kind of empire, one that would leave its mark on history forever. The Mongol Empire, at its height, was an unstoppable force, a single power stretching from the shores of the Pacific to the plains of Hungary. No empire before or after had ruled over such an expanse with such speed, such discipline, and such fear. Yet even the greatest storms must one day calm, and the empire that had seemed eternal began to fracture under the weight of its own vastness. The same power that allowed it to conquer the world would become the seed of its decline. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the world held its breath. His death was kept secret at first, hidden even from his own army, as his generals continued their campaigns to ensure that no sign of weakness would reach the enemy. He had built not just an empire, but a system, a machine of governance and war that could continue after him. But an empire ruled by a single vision begins to tremble the moment that vision is gone. Power passed to his sons and grandsons, each a warrior in his own right, but none possessing the unifying presence of the great Khan himself. The vast empire was divided into khanates, the Golden Horde in the west, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. At first, this division seemed practical, a way to manage the immense territories efficiently, but beneath the surface, ambition simmered. Every Khan claimed loyalty to the legacy of Genghis, but each ruled in his own way, guided by different goals and different visions. The unity that had once made the Mongols invincible began to fade. The sons of the steppe who had once fought side by side now eyed each other with suspicion. The empire that had thrived on discipline and order slowly gave way to politics, luxury, and internal rivalry. The Golden Horde clashed with the Ilkhanate. The Yuan dynasty struggled to maintain control over a vast and foreign China. What Genghis had built through simplicity and loyalty began to crack under the weight of complexity and distance. And yet, even as the empire fractured, its influence did not vanish. The Mongols had connected the world in ways that no other power had before. Trade flourished under their protection, stretching across the Silk Road from Europe to Asia. Merchants, scholars, and travelers moved freely across continents. It was during this era that figures like Marco Polo journeyed to China, bringing back stories of cities larger and richer than anything Europe had ever imagined. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, became one of history's most remarkable periods of stability, where goods, ideas, and cultures flowed with unprecedented freedom. But peace, like power, could not last forever. In China, resentment grew among the native population, who saw the Mongols as foreign occupiers. Kublai Khan, though a capable ruler, became increasingly detached from the steppe traditions that had once defined Mongol strength. The empire's warriors grew accustomed to the luxuries of imperial life. The once mighty horsemen who had conquered the world now sat in marble palaces, ruling from thrones instead of saddles. The edge that had made them unstoppable dulled with time. In the West, the story was no different. The Golden Horde adopted Islam and began to blend into the cultures it once ruled. The Ilkhanate in Persia faced rebellion and division. One by one, the great Khanates weakened, not from defeat on the battlefield, but from the slow corrosion of internal decay. Their enemies learned their tactics, adapted to their speed, and built defenses strong enough to resist their assaults. The Mongols, once unpredictable and unified, had become predictable and divided. Still, their legacy refused to die. The systems they built, from postal routes to military organization, inspired generations of empires that followed. Their method of merit-based leadership, where ability mattered more than birth, echoed through time. Even their psychological warfare, their mastery of communication, and their logistical brilliance became lessons studied by generals for centuries. Nations rose from the ashes of their empire, shaped by the paths the Mongols had carved across the world. Culturally, the Mongols were more than conquerors. They were connectors. They blended ideas from every civilization they touched: Chinese innovation, Persian science, Islamic art, and European trade. Under their rule, paper money spread, gunpowder traveled west, and new maps were drawn that expanded humanity's understanding of the earth. The Mongols did not simply conquer land. They expanded the world's imagination. And yet, for all their achievements, the Mongols remained haunted by their origins. The steppe demanded loyalty to the past, to the horse, the bow, and the endless sky. As they became rulers of cities and empires, they drifted further from the traditions that had forged their greatness. The fire that had burned so fiercely in the open plains could not survive within the walls of the empire. The fall of the Mongols was not marked by one great battle or one sudden collapse, but by a slow fading, the passing of a storm that had once terrified the world. But even as their empire crumbled, their legend endured. The name of Genghis Khan still echoed through history, not as a memory of destruction, but as a symbol of unstoppable ambition. The Mongols had shown humanity what was possible, how a handful of tribes from the edge of the world could rise, unite, and shape history on a scale no one had ever imagined. The rise and fall of the Mongol Empire is not just the story of conquest, it's the story of transformation. From the endless grasslands of Mongolia came a force that rewrote the rules of power, strategy, and civilization itself. Genghis Khan took scattered nomadic tribes and molded them into a unified machine that changed the course of world history. His vision extended beyond mere war. It was about connection, control, and the creation of a world where no distance was too great, no barrier too high. The Mongols did not just conquer lands, they connected worlds. They bridged east and west, turning the Silk Road into the first true global highway of trade and culture. Through their rule, knowledge flowed from China's paper and gunpowder to the Middle East's science and Europe's maps. Their empire, though built on fear and fire, gave birth to an age of exchange that would shape the centuries that followed. But like all empires, their greatness carried the seeds of their downfall. Power spread too far, loyalties fractured, and the raw simplicity that had once defined their strength was lost to the weight of administration and luxury. Yet the echo of their thunderous charge still reverberates through history. Their military innovations became the foundation of modern warfare. Their governance inspired new forms of administration. Their daring reshaped the imagination of the empire itself. Even today, the legacy of the Mongols is not one of destruction, but of transformation. They forced the world to look beyond borders, to connect, to learn, and to evolve. Their story reminds us that from the most unexpected corners of the earth can rise forces powerful enough to reshape humanity's destiny. And perhaps that's the greatest mystery of all, how a people born in the vast emptiness of the steppe could build an empire so vast, so swift, and so enduring that, even after its fall, the world would never be the same again.